Bezza's Book of Enchantments by Andrea Pearson. Copyright 2015, Andrea Pearson. Dedication. To Emma, Libby, Eliza, Rosie, and Eva. We love you. Carter slumped onto the park bench and rubbed his eyes. He and Ridge were finished. He still couldn't believe it. That was one of the hardest oral reports I've ever researched, he said, glancing over as Ridge, his best friend, also sat down. It's nice to get outside again. Ridge nodded. I wish you could have found out more about him. Nikolaus Croft, a composer so obscure not even the internet knew who he was. Carter laughed. Stop exaggerating. I got enough material for the report. Yeah. And hey, at least no one will be able to check our facts. Carter smiled. They had been best friends since Ridge had moved into the neighborhood a year ago. Carter had learned quickly that his friend was almost always sarcastic. It had taken a while to get used to, but now he enjoyed Ridge's quick wit. He was still adjusting to Ridge's talent at avoiding anything that resembled hard work. This wasn't the first project they'd worked together on, and it wasn't the first time Carter had done most of it. He stared at his shoes, realizing he would need to do something about that someday. Pushing his thoughts away, Carter opened his backpack and pulled out his part of the report. Did you ask your dad if he's ever heard of Nikolaus Croft? Yeah, but he hasn't. I'm telling you, the guy's too obscure. Carter slouched. Well, would he be willing to play one of Kraft's songs? We could really use the extra credit. Ridge snickered. You mean you could use the credit? It's not my dad's fault you forget to practice. Haha. Very funny. Besides, we both know I practice more than you do. Ridge shrugged. Mrs. Stout hasn't noticed or seemed to care. Carter hesitated, almost pointing out the obvious, that Mrs. Stout didn't know Ridge lied about how much he actually practiced. But Ridge would get mad, and Carter wasn't in the mood to deal with one of his tantrums today. Carter glanced at the papers folded in his hands. He had a lot of memorizing to do, but he couldn't force his mind to begin. Neither boy said anything for several moments, and Carter closed his eyes, hoping the sun would erase the headache researching the oral report had given him. Ridge poked Carter in the side. Look, he whispered, pointing to the forest across the street from the park. Who's that? Carter squinted, trying to get a better look at the old man running, stumbling, with a book clutched to his chest. Ranch City wasn't a big place, and Carter had lived there his whole life. He knew immediately that he'd never seen the man before. The guy's crazy hair wouldn't be easy to forget. Is he homeless? Ridge didn't respond, and both boys watched the old man race down the street. He kept looking over his shoulder and nearly fell several times. The desperation on his face made it obvious he didn't want to be caught, but Carter couldn't see anyone chasing him. The man glanced in the boys' direction, then charged toward them, waving the book. Take it, he shrieked as he got closer. Please take it. Protect it. Ridge and Carter glanced at each other. Ridge lunged to his feet and grabbed his things, shoving them into his backpack. Let's get out of here. Carter didn't respond. He warily stood, eyes on the old man. No, please don't go, the man called. I need help. Please help. Carter hesitated, ignoring Ridge's eye roll. The old man reached them and thrust the book into Carter's hands. They're coming, they want the book. We have to protect it. It's too valuable. He looked over his shoulder, then turned back to Carter, words tumbling out of his mouth. I'll be back. Saturday morning. This park. Okay. Who are you? Why do we need to take it? Aldo, and... Something roared in the trees on the other side of the park, and the old man shrieked and scrambled away from the boys. I'll lead them in the other direction, he said over his shoulder as he dashed off again. Go now. Carter stared after Aldo, not resisting as Ridge grabbed his arm and pulled him the opposite way. They ran to Carter's house and flung the door open. Carter led the way upstairs to his bedroom and shut the door tight before they flopped onto the floor. What book did he give you? Ridge gasped. Carter waited to catch his breath, then raised the book to look at the cover. Bezza's Book of Enchantments, he read. A guide to common, and some not so common, spells and potions. Huh, Ridge said. I'll open it. Let's see what's inside. Carter rolled to a sitting position, and the boys crouched over the book, turning the pages one at a time. The title was accurate. It was a book of enchantments and spells. Carter snickered when, after they got through a short introduction, the book started with a love potion. The next page had a love potion for extra thick-headed men. That was followed by a love potion for tender-hearted men, then potions for every other kind of man. The next section was all about maintaining proper beauty to help the love potions work, growing pretty hair, long eyelashes, and making a woman's skin especially clear and healthy. I'm going to guess that Bezza was a girl. Ridge leaned against the bed and pulled out his oral report. Let me know if you find anything interesting. Carter continued flipping through the book one page at a time. He found himself mesmerized by the handwriting. It was erratic, loopy, and all over the place. He could definitely tell the book was written by a woman, probably Bezza, whoever she was, but the handwriting wasn't very feminine. He hesitated when he turned the page to the first spell that wasn't about love and beauty. This one teaches how to raise someone from the dead. Seriously? Cool. Ridge took the book from Carter and glanced over the recipe. Seems easy. Want to give it a try? Carter blinked. You're joking, right? No, I'm not. We could raise Hitler or Einstein. Maybe Beethoven. Why not? Hitler's the first person to pop into your head? Carter stared at Ridge with one eyebrow raised. And I can think of plenty of reasons why not. We have no idea where the book came from or who that Aldo guy was. And we have no idea if the spell would even work. Besides, what if it does work? What do we do then? Ridge's eyes lit up. We'd find out more about Nikolaus Croft. We'd bring him back to life. We'd make sure our facts are correct by asking the actual person. Ridge's face glowed with excitement. And we'd have him play the cello for our report Friday. Think about it. Mrs. Stout would love that. Carter chewed the inside of his lip. I don't know, Ridge. I don't know. He took the book back. The spell included instructions on how to return the person to their grave. At least they'd have a way out if it did work. He looked down at the required ingredients. These are really weird. Ridge barely glanced at him. An egg, dirt, water, kerosene, and a cooking pot. Those aren't weird, those are common. He leaned back. Besides, if we try it and nothing happens, no harm done, right? Carter frowned. I don't want to mess up the equilibrium of the universe or something. Ridge scoffed. Like that's possible. Besides, there's no such thing as magic. You can't bring someone back to life. Then why try out the spell? Because we'll die never knowing if we could have brought Nikolaus Croft back. If we could have gotten an A+ on our report. If we could have had extra credit. Carter didn't respond. He and Ridge both knew they'd at least get an A on the report. They'd done their work. At least Carter had. But that extra credit from having the actual Nikolaus Croft come and play really would help Carter's overall grade in orchestra. Besides, it would be cool to meet someone from the 1700s. Fine. We'll try it out. But if it does work, we return Nikolaus Croft as soon as our report is finished. Deal. Deal. Ridge held out his hand, and Carter shook it. Let's get to work. They agreed that Ridge would run home to retrieve his kerosene lamp, while Carter got the other ingredients. The boys split up. 20 minutes later, they met in Carter's room to perform the spell. First, they mixed all of the dirt and water together in the pan, forming a smooth mud, before digging nearly to the bottom and burying the egg there. Then, following the instructions, Carter made a small divot in the top while Ridge carefully opened his lamp. We only need a little bit of oil, Carter said. So pour carefully. Help me, Ridge said. The boys slowly tipped the lamp until about a teaspoon's worth filled the divot. Ridge took the lamp and wiped away the excess oil that had dribbled down the side. Carter held his hand over the kerosene and, as required, thought of the person he wanted to bring back. Apparently, as soon as he said a few necessary words, a small fire would rush into the pan, completing the spell. "Go ahead," Ridge said. Carter took a deep breath, then said, "Donne solun we Nicolaus Croft." He felt something pull from his hand, an energy that tickled his fingers, and then a small whoosh brushed through him. The kerosene poofed into flames, and with another whoosh, the fire flowed over the entire mound of mud. Carter jumped when the mud shifted shape, molding itself around the egg, forming a flaming brown mud ball that dried and hardened. The fire died. The ball shifted until it was leaning against the side of the pan, then remained motionless. Neither boy spoke for several seconds. "Is that it?" Ridge asked. "I think so." "Now what?" "We wait," Carter said. "It needs a dark, dry place." He jumped to his feet and pulled shoes, toys, soccer balls, and dirty socks out of his closet. With Ridge's help, he pushed the pan into the back corner, then covered it with a heavy blanket. Ridge started, "So how do we send the person back once they come alive?" "It's easy. You repeat the words you used to call them here." Carter stepped away from the closet, shutting the door. "Okay, now it needs to sit for 24 hours. Then we wait for the egg to hatch and the person to come out." "A full day," Ridge said. "That's stupid." Carter agreed. "Let's meet back here tomorrow afternoon." "Okay." Ridge grabbed his things. "See you at school." School passed so slowly the next day that Carter felt like he'd actually watched every single minute tick by on the clock. Finally, the last bell rang, and he ran home to study while waiting for Ridge to finish piano lessons. An hour later, Ridge joined him. They looked at the timer Carter had set on his phone yesterday. A minute left, then they watched the door. The timer beeped and something banged from inside the closet, making both boys jump. "Whoa," Ridge said, looking at Carter. His eyes whipped back to the door when something or someone moaned inside the closet. "What do we do?" Carter hissed. Ridge didn't respond, but his dark eyes were nearly perfect O's. Something heavy hit the door, and the boys scrambled away. A person, clearly a man, groaned, then spoke. "Hello." The voice was deep and muffled. Carter's jaw dropped. "It worked," he whispered. Something hit the door again, and he rushed over to open it. A man stepped out. He was dressed in a costume, looking ready for Halloween. Carter felt the blood drain from his face as he realized it wasn't a costume, it was period clothing. The man squinted in the bright light from the ceiling fixture, then shielded his eyes. He spotted Ridge and reached over, grabbing him. "Where am I?" Carter hesitated, then moved out from behind the door and asked, "You speak English?" How could the guy be the real Nicolaus Croft if he spoke English? Nicolaus turned toward Carter and relaxed. "Oh, Carter. Good." He released Ridge and stepped away. "Excuse me, but where am I?" Carter tilted his head, wondering if this was some sort of joke. "You're in Ranch City. How do you know my name? And if you're really Nicolaus, how do you speak our language?" Nicolaus's eyes flitted back and forth between Carter and the furniture in the room. "Why, I speak the language of the person who brought me to life, of course. How else would I be conversing in your tongue? And it's Nicolaus," he said it Nicolaus, not whatever it is you just said. He picked up Carter's alarm clock, inspecting the red number display. Carter and Ridge looked at each other. Nicolaus set down the clock. "Now, don't you have a report I need to see?" Carter tilted his head. "You know about that." Nicolaus folded his arms and raised his eyes to the ceiling. He took a deep breath, obviously trying to control his temper, though Carter had no idea why the guy would be impatient. "I understand your reasons for bringing me, and for as long as I'm alive, my will is yours. I live to serve you. Quite literally." He gazed at the posters on the wall, before turning back to Carter. "So I repeat myself, where is the report?" Ridge grinned. "It's in our brains. Here, I'll start. He cleared his throat. Nikolaus Croft was born on December. Nikolaus held out his hand. You're not pronouncing my name correctly. It isn't exactly a difficult one to say. Why do you struggle? Ridge rolled his eyes. You're just going to have to get used to it, okay? I will not. Dude, listen. You're in America. We don't say things the same as you Europeans. Carter held up his hand. We'll just call him Nico for now. He looked at Nikolaus. Is that all right? Nikolaus repeated the name to himself a couple of times. I like it. He glanced at Ridge. But for your report, you'll have to use my full name. And I don't look forward to hearing you slaughter it again. Fine. Nico motioned to Ridge. Please continue. Ridge resumed where he'd left off, with only a few stops, and Nico made minor corrections to names and dates. When Ridge finished, Nico turned to Carter and had him give his part. Carter finished, and Nico didn't say anything. So, what do you think? Carter asked. Nico rubbed his chin. I sense there's something else you would like from me. Carter and Ridge glanced at each other. Carter nodded, turning back to Nico. There is. He took a deep breath. Would you be comfortable playing the cello tomorrow for our report? For extra credit. My cousin plays. We could borrow hers. Nico grinned. I would love nothing more. Carter and Ridge finished clearing out the closet so Nico would have a place to sleep. Good thing it's a big closet, Ridge said. Good thing my mom only looks in it once in a while, Carter said. He'd been doing his own laundry for a couple of years, and Mom only had to come check things out every now and then. Carter looked at his watch. It's almost time for dinner. He glanced at Nico. I'll bring you up something to eat as soon as I can. The boys shut the closet door, then dashed downstairs, where Ridge said goodbye and Carter helped Mom set the table. If she noticed his eagerness, she didn't mention it. He couldn't believe it. Nikolaus Croft was in his room. The actual guy, all the way from the 1700s. Weird. Awesome. Oh, he needed to call his cousin and arrange to borrow the cello. He did so quickly, explaining to her that a friend, an adult friend, wanted to use it. She agreed to bring it over that evening. I'll need to see him play, just to make sure he knows what he's doing, she said. Carter had a hard time concentrating during dinner. Halfway through, he excused himself to use the bathroom, then dashed upstairs and took Nico across the hall to wash up. Nico was very fascinated by the plumbing. He turned the faucet on and off several times, obviously excited by how quickly the water came out. It's marvelous. I'm pleased that I don't have to return to my time, because I doubt I would ever forget this. Carter laughed, then pulled the dinner rolls out of his pocket that he'd stuffed there for his guest. I'll bring more later. Nico wasn't as excited about them as he was about the plumbing. You call this bread, but it's not even close. Why, not even the servants would be asked to ingest this sort of atrocious. Shish. Carter hissed. My mom will hear you. Be glad it's edible. Nico snorted. Barely. That evening, Carter hid in his room, hanging out with Nico. His cousin would be there in half an hour. While waiting, Carter formulated a plan for how to get Nico downstairs without Mom noticing. Mom will answer the door. Dad's still at work, and Trevor, my brother, will probably run into the front room. As soon as I tell you, sneak down and out the back door. Come around to the front and ring the bell. I'll let you in. Carter glanced at the closet. I wish there was a way to convince my mom to let you stay in the guest room until it's time to go back. A doubtful expression crossed Nico's face. How will you do that when I'm a perfect stranger and a grown man? Carter frowned. I know. That's why I said I wish. She'd never be okay with it. Nico put his hand on Carter's shoulder. It's only for a couple of days, and then you'll return me. I can handle that. I dare say, things have been worse than this for me in the past. After all, you do manage to keep the temperature at a comfortable level. Carter nodded, then got to his feet when the doorbell rang. He heard Trevor race across the house to the front room, followed by Mom's quieter footsteps. Time to go. Carter led the way down the stairs and into the kitchen, where he showed Nico the back door. "See you in a minute." Nico waved, then disappeared into the darkness outside. Carter left the kitchen and walked down the hall to the front room, where his cousin was already getting out her cello. A moment later, the doorbell rang, and he jumped up to get it, letting Nico in. Not knowing how else to introduce Nico, Carter told everyone that he was a friend of Ridge's family. "He's going to help with our orchestra report in the morning." "Oh, wonderful." Mom smiled at Nico. "I know Carter and Ridge were hoping Ridge's father would be able to play, but he's a very busy man. This means a lot to Carter." Nico nodded. "I don't often play anymore. It'll be a delight to hold a cello in my hands again." Carter's cousin held out her instrument. "Go ahead. Play something." Nico sat with a flourish, flipping out his tailcoat and tightening the bow. Carter relaxed against the couch, grateful that Nico knew what he was doing. Nico played a couple of songs that Carter didn't recognize, but he could tell his cousin knew them. She and Mom both smiled, obviously impressed. He played for almost half an hour, taking requests. After agreeing to let his cousin know when he wanted her to come get the cello, Carter walked her to the door and waved goodbye as she got into her car and drove away. He turned back to Nico. "Thanks for playing for us. I'll keep the cello here tonight if you want to come in the morning and help me get it to school. I have orchestra first, so you won't have to wait around all day." Nico nodded and got to his feet. He turned to Mom. "It was a pleasure meeting you. Please excuse me, I have work to attend to." "Wow," Mom said once Nico left. He's really good. I wish Dad had been home to hear it." Carter agreed, then quickly thought of a way to get Mom to leave the room so Nico could come back inside. "I'm going to rehearse for my oral report again. Do you mind if I do it in here alone?" "Of course not, Carter. Just let me know if you need anything." Mom left, and Carter watched her walk down the hall, past the stairs, and into the laundry room. He dashed to the door and opened it. "Nico," he called softly. "Nico." "Here." Nico stepped out of the bushes to the left of the door. "Come on in. You can hang out in my room until it's time to go back in the closet." Carter made sure the coast was clear again before pointing Nico to his bedroom. Then he went back to the front room and practiced his oral report, imagining how his teacher would respond the next day when the actual Nikolaus Croft played the cello for the entire orchestra. It would be awesome. Mom drove Nico, Carter, and Ridge to school the next morning, saying it was inappropriate to make Nico take the bus. Carter had a really hard time controlling his laughter at Nico's response to being in a car for the first time. He could tell Nico was trying to hide his reactions from Mom. She was hurried, as usual, so Carter was positive she hadn't noticed. But Nico would obviously remember that ride for the rest of his, well, very short life. Once they got to school, Carter and Ridge helped Nico check in at the front office, then the three of them walked to the orchestra room. Nico waited outside with the cello. Mrs. Stout was flustered and cranky that morning. Carter took a deep breath when it was their turn. Hopefully, she'd be cheerful enough to give them a good grade. Ridge started his portion of the presentation, talking about Nico's earlier life and accomplishments. Then it was Carter's turn to talk about Nico's compositions and later life. "And now," Carter said once he'd finished his part, "we have a visit from the man himself. I give you Nikolaus Croft." Nico stepped into the room carrying the cello, a wide smile on his face. Children, it is a pleasure to be with you." Mrs. Stout raised an eyebrow. "Ridge, is this your father?" Ridge shook his head. "Hardly. It's the real Nikolaus Croft." Nico scowled at Ridge's very American pronunciation of his name. "Well, all right," Mrs. Stout said. Mr. Croft, what have you prepared for us?" Nico grabbed a chair and sat down, facing the students. I shall perform for you one of my own compositions. Very well. Go ahead. Mrs. Stout sat down, obviously annoyed that she wouldn't be told Nico's true identity. Nico began playing, and Carter kept his eyes on Mrs. Stout. He grinned when the irritation cleared from her face, replaced with a smile. She closed her eyes, enjoying the music. Carter elbowed Ridge and pointed to their teacher. Ridge gave him a thumbs up. They'd aced it. Carter knew Mrs. Stout graded fairly and that the boys had done exactly what they were supposed to do, but making her this pleased would definitely get them that extra credit. Nico stopped playing after several minutes, then stood and bowed. As you've probably never had the opportunity to meet a real composer from the 1700s, I shall now tell you more about my life than Carter and Ridge were able to find on the undernet. He glanced at Carter, as if to make sure he'd pronounced the word correctly. Not wanting to discourage him, Carter smiled at him to continue. Nico told them about playing for Beethoven and Mozart and Tabor. He told them about learning the cello under his father and then moving on to other instructors. Mrs. Stout clapped as loudly as everyone else when Nico finished. I'd love to learn how you boys found an actor who plays the cello and knows so much about Nikolaus Croft. Ridge rolled his eyes, but Carter just grinned, knowing she'd never believe the truth. The rest of the reports passed in a blur. Carter was too happy about the results of their hard work to concentrate. He couldn't wait to thank Nico for helping. That evening, Ridge and Carter laughed with Nico over Mrs. Stout's reaction to his performance. Even after everything I knew, she still refused to acknowledge my true identity, Nico said, rubbing his eyes. Unbelievable. I don't blame her, Ridge said. She's not very imaginative. Nico yawned, then slumped against the bed. I can sense that my purpose for being here is over. It is time I sleep again. He glanced up at Carter. Please release me. Carter frowned. You mean you get tired when your time's up? Nico nodded. Yes, but not just that. I will wilt and suffer until you return me. He straightened. There are other things you must know, as I sense you plan to do this again. His gaze landed on Ridge before drifting to Carter. You are not allowed to change a person's purpose for coming back once they are here. And keeping them here longer will only result in more suffering. He narrowed his gaze at Ridge, waiting until the boy met his eyes. Keep that in mind, Ridge. Ridge nodded as Carter said, Thanks for letting us know. We won't be doing this again anyway. The boys said goodbye to Nico and promised to bring him back if they ever needed anything. Carter held his hand above Nico and said the special words. Done solun we Nikolaus Croft. Nico slumped down, then dissolved into mud and an empty eggshell. Oh, oops, Carter said, looking at the mess all over the carpet. There was enough mud there to mold an entire adult. Would have been great to know about that ahead of time. No kidding. Ridge wrinkled his nose. So, how are you going to clean it up? Carter raised his eyebrow. As fast as possible, and before my mom finds it. Well, good luck. Gotta go have dinner. Ridge left, leaving Carter's door open. Carter sighed in frustration, then shut the door and got to work right away. He pulled out the pan that was still in the closet and filled it, then carried it out back repeatedly. After half an hour, he'd removed most of the mud. Then he ran to the garage and hauled the heavy vacuum up the stairs. Mom, who'd been on the phone with Grandma, saw him on the way up and asked what he was doing. I spilled some mud on my floor, he said, realizing that outright lying was a bad idea. Mud? Mom asked, eyeing him. I gotta hurry, don't want it to stain. I'll explain later. You'd better, young man. Carter scrubbed and scrubbed, until there was just the faintest hint that mud had ever been there. Ridge dropped by just as he was finishing up. How'd it go? Carter grumbled. I couldn't get all of it to go away. He sat on his bed and glared at the carpet, wishing he could shove Ridge for making him clean it up on his own. But maybe this is a good thing. I mean, as a reminder for us not to do the spell again. Ridge scoffed. You mean, a reminder to you? It's in your bedroom, not mine. And I'm definitely going to raise other people. Can you imagine how much easier school will be if we can just call back the people and have them give us answers? Carter shook his head. No, Ridge. We can't do it again. That's fine for you, Ridge said. But can I at least copy the pages of the book in case any of the other spells are worth trying? Carter's mouth popped open. Are you serious? No. And I'm not kidding about this. We're not using the book or the spells anymore. We're meeting Aldo tomorrow to give it back, remember? Speak for yourself, dude. Ridge lunged across the room and grabbed Bezza's book of enchantments. Before Carter could say anything, he dashed out of the room and down the stairs. Carter raced after him, but Ridge had a good head start, and Carter had a mom who wanted to know more about the mud. She stopped him before he could follow Ridge through the front door. Show me. Now. She grabbed him by the arm and marched him back up the stairs. Well, you got rid of most of it, she said after she'd seen the stain. The rest won't ever go away. She sat on his bed. What happened? Ridge and I performed an experiment. It worked, but then we messed things up in the end. He pulled the pan out from the closet where he'd shoved it after he finishing hauling the mud. We used this. Mom gasped. My good pan. She yanked it from his arms. Carter, don't ever do that again. You come to me before messing with my things or experimenting again. Carter stared at his shoes. I'm sorry, Mom. And I will. Mom pulled him down next to her. I don't understand what's gotten into you, Carter. You used to be so responsible. She put her hand on his cheek and looked him in the eye. Ridge hasn't been a good influence on you. You've done a lot of stupid things since he moved in. I think you need to take a break from hanging out with him and spend time with someone else instead. Carter nodded. Okay. She was right. He and Ridge had gotten in trouble more times in the past year than he had in his entire life. It took a long time for Carter to fall asleep that night. He dreaded going to the park in the morning without the book. What would he tell Aldo? The next morning, Carter took his time walking to the park. He knew he was just procrastinating, but he couldn't help it. When he got there, he was surprised to see Ridge sitting on the bench already, holding the book. Ridge handed it over. It wouldn't copy, he said. No matter how many machines I tried, they all stopped working as soon as I put it near them. Carter didn't respond. He sat next to Ridge, not wanting to look at him. Hey, Ridge said. I'm sorry. Carter nodded. He almost said he was sorry too, but realized he didn't have anything to apologize for. They were silent until the old man arrived. He was much calmer this time, walking instead of running, but his hair was just as crazy as before. Thank you so much, Aldo said, taking the book from Carter's arms. He glanced down at it, narrowed his eyes, then looked at the boys. You performed one of the spells, didn't you? Neither boy responded. Don't do that again. You have no idea what you're messing with. Aldo held the book to his chest. I can sense that you did your best to undo the spell, but you must promise me something. Promise me you'll never do it again. We won't, Ridge said really fast. Carter's mouth popped open. He glanced over, then glared when he saw that Ridge had his fingers crossed behind his back. Ridge's false promise apparently satisfied Aldo because he nodded. Thank you, and thank you for taking care of the book. I need to return it to Bezza now, but maybe I'll see you later. Wait, Carter called. Who's Bezza? And what was chasing you? Bezza is the wife of a good friend, Aldo said. And as for that beast, it wasn't from Earth. But don't worry, I had some friends take care of it. He winked, then turned and left, whistling as he strolled away. Not from Earth? Carter didn't know whether or not he should believe the man. But he had other things to deal with now. He frowned at Ridge. You lied to him. Ridge shrugged. So? You never know when bringing someone back to life will come in handy. I mean, it would be cool to meet Hitler, wouldn't it? Carter scowled in disgust. No, it wouldn't. You're seriously messed up, Ridge. Sure am. Ridge grinned and put his arm around Carter's shoulder. What should we do now? We've got the entire day ahead of us. Carter shrugged away. My mom says I can't hang out with you for a while. She's convinced you're a bad influence on me. Ridge nodded, still grinning. And she's right. He leaned back on the bench. Let me know when you're ready. I memorized the spell, and have a whole list of people I want to meet. Carter didn't respond. He got to his feet and left, hands in his pockets, wondering what to do with Ridge. He knew Ridge's personality. It wouldn't be long before the boy had brought back several people, and who knew what sort of problems he'd cause. Carter sighed, kicking a rock across the street. Good thing he hadn't promised Aldo not to raise people from the dead. He was the only one who knew what Ridge planned to do, and he had a feeling he'd need help. Would you like to gain access to exclusive audiobooks only available to members of Andreas Readers Group? Click the link in the description to learn more.